Hello and welcome. This book is called Mind Power by William Walker Atkinson. Some have described it as a masterpiece. Some have described it as an encyclopedia of the mind. And it contains the secrets of mental magic. There is no doubt, though, that mind power is vast and exhaustive, both in scope and content. This work is the culmination of decades of study by one of the most influential thinkers of the early 20th century, William Walker Atkinson. With numerous practical exercises, this is an excellent resource for anyone looking to maximize their mental abilities, covering everything from the law of attraction to personal magnetism to mental suggestions and the influence of others. Mind Power is a goldmine of wisdom and knowledge. It will richly reward any reader serious enough to thoroughly understand and practice the principles contained within it. I hope you enjoy it. First chapter, The Mental Dynamo. I wish to invite you to the consideration of a great principle of nature, a great natural force that manifests its activities in the phenomena of dynamic mentation, a great something, the energies of which I have called mind power. My thought on the subject is based upon the fundamental conception that there exists in nature a dynamic mental principle, a mind power pervading all space, immanent in all things, manifesting in an infinite variety of forms, degrees, and phases. I hold that this energy or force or dynamic principle is no respecter of person. Its service, like that of the sun and the rain, and all natural forces, is open to all, just and unjust, good or bad, high and low, rich and poor. It responds to the proper efforts, no matter by whom exerted or for what purpose called into effect. But the proper effort must be exerted consciously or unconsciously, else there will be no operation of the force. I believe that the activities of these dynamic mental principles are intimately correlated to manifestation of the mental operations known to us as desire, will, and imagination. We shall learn something of the laws and principles and modes of operation of its energies and activities as we proceed with our consideration of it in this work. It may be difficult for you to grasp the conception of mind power at the start, but it will grow upon your understanding as its activities are presented to you one by one like a great panorama. My terms will be explained and illustrated by examples as we proceed, so you need not analyze them at this point. It may be as well, however, to state that I have used the term dynamic in its original Greek sense, that is, powerful, possessing power. I have postulated of my conception of mind power that it pervades all space, is immanent in all things, and manifests in an infinite variety of forms, degrees, and phases. But it may be urged, this is nothing more than science claims for the principles of physical energy. Then is mind power identical with the physical energy of science? Is it nothing more than a higher form of mechanical or material energy? No. Mind power is very far from being a blind, mechanical energy. It is a living mental force, which I hold is behind the manifestation of physical energy and mechanical force. It is not the physical energy of science, but is something of the nature of a living will, which is rather the cause of physical energy than identical with it. Let us take a familiar example. You desire to move your hand, and it moves. Why? Because of the manifestation of the wonderful and mysterious force called will, which is stored up within you, which you have released to move the hand. You send a current of nerve force, which is really a manifestation of mind power or will force from your brain along the nerves of your arm, which contracts the muscles of the arm and hand, and your desire is gratified. Your desire or wish set in motion the mind power which acted upon the material substance of your body and caused it to act. What was it that flowed along the nerve wires? Was it electricity or magnetism? No. It was the subtle and mysterious thing that I'm calling mind power, which is bound up with the will principle of mind. Mind power is an actual living force. It is the force that makes plants grow and animal bodies grow, and which enables all living things to move and act. It is the force which enables the growing mushroom to raise up the slabs of paving stones, or causes the roots of the tree to split open the great boulders into crevices of which they have crept. Mind power is not an abstraction or speculative nothing. It is an existent, living, mental, acting force, manifesting sometimes with an appalling power and sometimes with a delicate, subtle touch that is almost imperceptible, but which accomplishes its purpose. In order to reach a clear conception of the universality of mind power, let us consider its manifestations as we see them, unquestioned in the universe. On the many planes of life and activity, beginning with the more familiar instances of its operation and manifestation, let us then proceed to delve still deeper until we reach instances not so easily perceived, and then still further back until we find it in places and in things that are generally regarded as lacking in mind power and life. And here let me say that I hold that life and mind power are always found in company with each other. There is some close relationship between the two. They are probably twin phases of the same thing, or else twin manifestations of the same underlying reality. There is no life without mind and mind power, and no mind power or mind without life. And further, I claim that there is nothing without life in the universe, nothing lifeless there or anywhere. The universe is alive and has mind and mind power in every part and particle of itself. This is not an original idea of my own, of course. The leading scientific thinkers admit it today, and the Hindu philosophers have known it for 50 centuries. Do you doubt this? Then listen to these authorities who ably express the thought of their scientific schools. Luther Burbank, the most wonderful man who has revolutionized our conceptions of plant life and who has practically held plant life in the palm of his hands, says, "All my investigations have led me away from the idea of a dead material universe, tossed about by various forces, to that of a universe which is absolutely all force, life, soul, thought, or whatever name we choose to call it. Every atom, molecule, plant, animal, or planet is only an aggregation of the organized unit forces held in place by stronger forces, thus holding them for a time latent, though teeming with inconceivable power. All life on our planet is, so to speak, just on the outer fringe of this infinite ocean of force. The universe is not half dead, but all alive. Dr. Selby, in his important scientific work, Evolution, the Master Key, goes even still further in his claim of a living universe and life accompanied by mind. He says, among other things, life is potential in matter. Life energy is not a thing unique and created at a particular time in the past. If evolution be true, living matter has been evolved by a natural process from matter which is apparently not alive. But if life is a potential in matter, it is 1,000 times more evident that mind is potential in life. The evolutionist is impelled to believe that mind is potential in matter. I adopt that form of words for the moment, but not without future criticism. The microscopic cell, a minute speck of matter that is to become man, has in it the promise and germ of mind. May we not then draw the inference that the elements of mind are present in those chemical elements, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, chlorine, that are found in the cells? Not only must we do so, but we must go further, since we know that each of these elements and every other is built up out of one invariable unit, the electron. And we must therefore assert that mind is potential in the unit of matter, the electron itself. Flammarion, the eminent French scientist, says, "The universe is a dynamism. Life itself, from the most rudimentary cell up to the most complicated organism, is a special kind of movement, a movement determined and organized by a directing force. Visible matter, which stands to us at the present moment for the universe, and which certain classic doctrines consider as the origin of all things, movement, life, thought, is only a word void of meaning. The universe is a great organism, controlled by a dynamism of the physical order. Mind gleams through its every atom. There is mind in everything, not only in human and animal, but in plants, in minerals, in space." Professor J.A. Fleming, in his work on waves, air, and ether, says, "In its ultimate essence, energy may be incomprehensible by us except as an exhibition of direct operation of that which we called mind and will. Let us then follow the hint given by the scientists. Let us proceed to examine the evidence of the immanence of life and mind power in all of the things of the universe, things organic, things inorganic, and things beyond organism, shape, and form, back into the very ether of space itself, and in the search we shall find these evidence everywhere and in all things. Nowhere does life and mind power escape us. Immanent in all things, manifesting in infinite variety of forms, degrees, and phases, we find these twin principles. I invite you to join in one of the most interesting and fascinating exploration known to modern science. We do not need any proof to demonstrate the existence of life, mind, and mind power in man, or in the lower animals. The activities resulting from its presence are in constant evidence. And if we examine the plant kingdom, we will see manifestations of life, mind, and mind power there also. Plants not only manifest appetencies or instinctive tendencies on the part of low forms of organic life to perform certain acts necessary for their well-being, particularly in the selection and the absorptions of the material substances necessary for their support and nutriments. Not only instinct or involuntary and unreasoning prompting of impulse and the response thereto, but also in certain cases there appears mental action closely akin to conscious choice and will. I refer you to the many recent works on mind in plant life for illustrations and proof of this statement. And biology shows us that there is life, mind, and mind power inherent in the cells of which our bodies, blood, and material of animal and plant life is composed. These cells are little lives and manifest mental powers and faculty that perform their particular functions and live, grow, reproduce themselves, and act just as do the tiny forms of animal life at the bottom of the ocean, the latter being but little more than single cells or cell groups, the possessions of memory on the part of the cells of organic matter is an accepted scientific fact. At this point, the orthodox and conservative scientist usually stops, drawing a line between the organic and inorganic matter. But the daring minds of advanced scientists of today have brushed aside the dividing line and have moved to a position where they meet the Hindu philosophers and the occultists and now admit and teach that life, mind, and mind power invade the inorganic world to its utmost limits, and that the universe is indeed alive and possesses mind. Some of the lower forms of organic life, so-called, possess no organic and are but masses of jelly-like matter without signs of even rudimentary organs, and yet these life forms show evidences of desire, choice, and will, and science has admitted the existence of life and mind in the crystals, the latter growing in a manner showing vital and selective energy and even rudimentary sex. More than this, the metals and minerals under scientific tests have shown responses that are similar to the same action in organic life, showing life and rudimentary sensations, the latter of course being a manifestation of mind. Some of the cold, careful scientific records read like fairy tales to those not familiar with the wonderful achievements of recent science. I wish that I had the time and space to recount these tests, but I must hasten on. Enough to say that in mineral and metallic forms, there has been responses indicating the existence of sensation in varying degrees, and that in the crystallization of minerals and metals, there has been evidence the actions of the same instinctive mental life energy which as appetency and instinct builds up the bodies of living organic forms. If you wonder at this and think of the miracle which is performed every second by plants absorbing the minerals of the earth, which are then converted into living plant cells, then we eat the plant and convert the plant cells into animal cells, which serves as the basis of our blood, muscles, organs, and even our brains. In fact, every particle of organic substance was evolved in this way. Think over this, and you will see that nature is one in her essence, and that she is alive and possesses mind power. But we do not stop even at this advanced point. Minerals in all forms of matter are composed of infinitesimal atoms or particles. The particles combined by reasons of some inherent attractions existing between certain of them, known as chemical affinity. Chemical affinity is a peculiar thing. It manifests in likes and dislikes, loves and hates. It is impossible to study these manifestations without recognizing an elementary manifestations of like and dislike, love and hate. You think that this is far-fetched, do you? Well, listen to these words from some of the leading scientists about this power to receive a sensation and power to respond to the same. Maybe you will change your mind. Haeckel, the great German scientist, holds that the atoms of which matter is composed may receive sensations and respond to sensation. He dwells upon the fact in his latest work, The Riddle of the Universe and the Wonders of Life, and writes as follows regarding sensations in the inorganic world. I cannot imagine, Haeckel says, the simplest chemicals and physical processes without attributing the movements of the material particles to unconscious sensation. He also says in another place, the idea of chemical affinity consists in the fact that the various chemical elements perceive the qualitative differences in other elements, experience pleasure or revulsion at contact with them, and execute specific movements on this ground. He adds later that the sensations and responses in plants and animal life are connected by a long series of evolutionary stages with the simpler forms of sensation that we find in the inorganic elements and that reveal themselves in chemical affinity. Nageli, another scientist, says, if the molecules possess something that is related, however distantly, to sensation, it must be comfortable to be able to follow their attraction and repulsions, uncomfortable when they are forced to do otherwise. And so you see that science now is preparing to admit elementary life and mind power in the atoms and particles of matter. But we have not as yet reached the utmost limit of scientific investigation regarding the presence of mind in the universe. Further than the atoms, you may ask. Yes, further than the atoms. What is true regarding the atoms is true of the ions or electrons of which they are composed. These tinier particles are attracted and repelled from groups and combinations which regulate the kind of atom produced, and manifest the same kind of affinity that is noticeable in atoms. And more than this, these particles, as well as all forms of physical energy, are believed to emerge from the ether, the subtle, tenuous, universal substance, which, although unseen and intangible, is held to exist in order to account for the phenomena of the universe. If there is mind in the particles that emerge from the ether, is it too much to claim that there must be mind in the ether itself? Is this preposterous? Not so. Listen to the words of the following scientific authorities on the subject. Flammarion says, mind gleams in every atom. There is mind in everything, not only in human and animal life, but in plants, in minerals, in space. Cope says, the basis of life and mind lies back of the atoms, and may be found in the universal ether. Hemstreet says, mind in the ether is no more unnatural than mind in flesh and blood. Stockwell says, the ether is coming to be apprehended as an immaterial, superphysical substance, filling all space, carrying in its infinite throbbing bosom the specks of aggregated dynamic force called worlds. It embodies the ultimate spiritual principle and represents the unity of those forces and energies from which springs as their source all phenomena, physical, mental, and spiritual, as they are known to man. Dolbear says, possibly the ether may be the medium through which mind and matter react. Out of the ether could emerge, under proper circumstances, other phenomena such as life or mind, or whatever may be in the substratum. And so we have the best of authority to support the inevitable conclusion that there must be mind power even in the ether. For my own part, I go still further, and for several years back have been claiming that the ether and the universal mind power principles are one and the same thing. That is, that the theoretical something that scientists call the ether is in reality the universal mind power principle from which all manifestations of activities emerge, the universal mental dynamo. I cannot prove this, of course, but it is logical. But my argument does not depend upon this, for admit that there is mind power in the ether, and my case is one, and in ether it must be, even if the ether is not but another name for it. For if mind power is not in the ether, from whence does it come? Into the particles of matter, and in matter itself, organic and inorganic. Resting the consideration for a moment, let me say that with mind as reason, intellect, etc., I have nothing to do in this book, for this is a consideration of the dynamic phase of mind, the power phase, the mind power or dynamic mentation. I'm trying to show you that mind power exists everywhere and is manifest in every activity of the universe, in every activity of the universe. You say, surely you do not include physical activity and energy such as natural forces, etc. Yes, I do mean just that. How can that be, you ask? What has mind power to do with electricity, light, heat, magnetism, gravitation, etc.? It has everything to do with them, in my opinion. I will explain it to you in a few words, for I cannot go into this subject at length in this book, but must hasten on to the other parts of my subject. Here it is in a nutshell. All the forms of natural physical energy or forces known as light, heat, electricity, magnetism, etc., are held by science to be forms of energy arising out from the vibration of the particles of matter. Now, what causes the vibration? Motions of the particles, of course. And what causes the particles to move? Just this: the attraction and repulsions existing between them. And what causes the particles to exhibit this attraction, repulsion towards each other? Now, here's where we get to the heart of the matter. Listen well. We have seen that the particles are attracted to or repelled by each other in the matter of likes and dislikes, love and hate, or pleasure and pain, or comfortable and uncomfortable experiences related, however distant, to sensations. And these attractions and repulsions are held to result from capacity to experience sensations and the power to respond to sensations, and both the power to receive and experience sensations and to respond thereto are manifestations of mentality, which Haeckel has compared to desire and will. And if mentality is the cause of these sensations and of the responses there, and the latter are the causes of attractions and repulsions, and the latter are the causes of motions to and fro of the particles of matter, and the latter in its turn is the cause of the vibrations, and the vibrations are the causes of the manifestations of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, etc., then am I not justified in claiming that mind and mind power are the motive forces of all physical energy? And am I not justified in postulating the existence of a universal mental dynamic principle? I tell you, friends, that the future will show that this dynamic mental principle is the source of energy, not energy the source of mind. I know that this is revolutionary, but I believe that it will meet the requirements of the future. I have been preaching this thing for several years now, and many have been the smiles, the jeers, and the sneers. But from the beginning, I have felt a keen appreciation of the words of Galvini when he said bitterly, "I am attacked by two very opposite sects. The scientists and the know-nothings both laugh at me, calling me the frog's dancing master. But I know that I have discovered one of the greatest forces in nature." And now, in conclusion, I must ask you to form a mental picture of the great universal dynamic mental principle, pervading all space, immanent in all things, and manifesting in an infinite variety of forms, degrees, and phases. We can think of it only by means of symbols. Let us then consider it as a great, living, throbbing, pulsating, and mentating ocean of dynamic mind power. In the depths of that ocean of mind power, there is quiet and calm and peace, the embodiment of latent power, potential energy. On its surface are ripples, waves, great movements of energy, currents, whirlpools, eddies, phases of fierce tempest alternating, and phases of calm and quiet. And from the depths of the ocean of mind power, all mental and physical power emerges, and to its bosom all must return. And in that ocean there is an infinite store of energy, from which may be drawn that which the human centers of consciousness and power require when they learn the secret. This ocean of mind power is our only source of dynamic energy, but we have at our disposal as much of its force as we can carry off over our channels of supply. It is the use of this power that we call dynamic mentation. Now, do you understand what I mean by the universal principle of dynamic mind power? This universal mental dynamo. Several years ago, I told a friend of this conception, and after he had listened to me attentively and with interest, he reflected a few moments and then suddenly asked, "But where do I come in?" And that is the question that many of you are asking now, no doubt. Well, while here I cannot dip into metaphysics or philosophical speculation, or even into my favorite occult sources, I will say that each of you is a center of power in that ocean of dynamic mind power, and each I is a master of the power. You have the whole thing back of you, and you are free to draw upon it for all that your channel will carry to you, and you are allowed to enlarge your channel. That is enough for this time. More will follow as we proceed. Chapter 2. The Nature of Mind Power. At this point, I am confronted with the question that naturally arises when one begins to consider an unfamiliar object, subject, or principle. The question of, what is it? What is mind power? It is a difficult question to answer, for it implies a knowledge of the thing in itself apart from its activities and manifestation. And this thing in selfness is something that the candid, scientific thinker admits is beyond the range of his thoughts and knowledge. Any attempt to answer such a question must involve one in a maze of metaphysical and philosophical speculation regarding something which is by nature unknowable. So I may as well frankly state here that I do not purpose guessing at the thing in itself of mind power. For at the best, any attempt at an answer would be merely a guess, for I do not know, neither do I know anyone else who knows. I am acquainted with the numerous speculations of the ancient and modern philosophers and metaphysicians on this subject. I have read and studied them and have rejected them as mere theories unsupported by facts. And I have made and rejected a dozen or more theories of my own on the subject, all vague, foolish speculations. I have studied the best of what has been written and thought regarding this thing in itself of mind and mind power. So you can see my ignorance is not the ignorance that comes from lack of thought or lack of acquaintance with the thoughts of others, but is rather the ignorance that comes as a result of much thought and much study of the thoughts of others, the ignorance that is only realized through knowledge. Regarding these ultimate questions, the best thinkers freely confess their ignorance, knowing that, as Nadao has said, they have plucked the supremest fruit of the tree of knowledge, the consciousness of our ignorance. Like Piron some 25 centuries ago, Uden horizo, I do not decide. We do not know things in themselves, we cannot know them. If we knew the ultimate truths regarding the tiniest and most insignificant thing in the universe, we would know everything that is. For the tiniest thing is connected with and related to everything in the universe, and that which underlies the universe. And to know the thing in itself of anything would be to know the great thing in itself of the all. All that we can do is to know and consider things by what they do or how they act, and through their manifestations and activities, and the results and the effect of the same, rather than by what they are in the abstract or apart from their activities, manifestations, and phenomena proceeding from them. Apart from their activities, manifestation, and phenomena, things are but abstract nothings so far as our understanding is concerned. Airy words coined by the metaphysicians and philosophers in order to provide food for speculation, argument, and dispute without end. And we may as well admit the fact that all consideration of the ultimate things in themselves, inevitably leads us to the conclusion that the only real thing in itself is a something underlying all things, and yet a no thing, and which transcends all of our experience, knowledge, reason, thought, and even imagination. And therein lies the folly of attempting to tell just what anything is. In view of the facts mentioned, which are held to be correct by the world's best thinkers, how much saner is it to devote our attention to the consideration of things as known through their activities, manifestations, and phenomena, knowing them by what they do and how they act, by the laws and principles of the activities and operations, rather than by speculations concerning their nature as abstract thing in themselves. This is the method of modern science as compared with those speculative philosophy and metaphysics. But a little learning is a dangerous thing, and fools rush in where angels fear to tread, and so we shall never be at a loss for ingenious theories and solutions of ultimate problems. We have among us some who glibly inform us that they know just what mind is. Such add to the gaiety of the nations, and therefore are useful and interesting. Did you ever hear of a youth at college who, when asked by his professor, "What is electricity?" answered, "Well, sir, I did know, but I have forgotten." The professor answered dryly, "Now, isn't that too bad? Here is the only person in the world who ever knew just what electricity is, and he has forgotten. What a loss to the race." Why do we not have courage enough to leave off this making of these speculative soap bubbles with which we have been amusing ourselves, and learn to answer honestly, "I do not know"? Or at least, like modern science, learn to frankly state, "Here our knowledge of the subject ends. Tomorrow we may know more, but sufficient for the day is the knowledge thereof, and an inch of knowledge of facts is worth a mile of unsupported speculation and theory." As Thomas L. Harris has said, the theorist who dreams a rainbow dream and calls hypothesis philosophy at best is but a paper financier who palms his species promises, for gold facts are the basis of philosophy, the harmony of facts seen in their right relation. And now, having confessed your ignorance and mine, let us now proceed to a consideration of mind power as known by its activities. In the first place, let me say that I do not hold that mind power is identical with mind. Rather, does it seem to me to be correlated to mind, particularly in the operation of mind known as desire, will, and imagination. If you like, we may consider it to be the acting aspect of the mind. Mind has three aspects: the aspects of being or substance, the aspects of thought, with the subdivisions of reason, feeling, emotion, desire, will, etc., on both conscious and subconscious plane. And third, the aspect of acting, and it is in this aspect of action that mind is known as mind power. While it is extremely likely that there is a certain employment and manifestation of mind power in the ordinary processes of reasoning, intellectual effort, etc., still mind power seems to be more closely connected with the more elementary phase of mentation, such as feeling, emotion, and particularly desire and will. We know that it is possessed by the lower forms of animals and plant life, even the inorganic forms, all of which existed and employed the force before intellect and reason manifested itself in man. And so I would impress upon you that while mind power may be called into operation by, and still more certainly may be directed by the intellect, still you must not make the mistake of identifying it with the phase of mind or attributing it solely to creatures possessing the same. It is a far more elementary and basic force, as you have seen in the preceding chapter. Indeed, in order that you may understand the operations of mind power, you may as well get into the habit of considering it as correlated to that which we call will, as distinguished from intellect and reason. By will, I do not mean that phrase of faculty of the mind which decides, determines, or chooses, although this customary use of the term is quite correct as applied to one phase of will. This deciding, choosing, determining faculty is one of the attributes of intellect and self-consciousness superimposed upon the elemental will in the direction of guiding, directing, turning, and restraining. It is the ego at the wheel, directing the sheep of life by the chart of reason, the motive power being will or mind power. Choice in the lower forms of life and activity simply means yielding to to the strongest desire, or aggregate of strongest desires, or average of the strongest desires. No, I did not mean will in the above sense, but in the more elementary sense of the term. The original sense for the word is derived from the root meaning to wish, to desire strongly. And in this elementary sense, the word will is used to designate that primitive, original, universal, mental principle in life which manifests in desire for action, and in the response to that desire. In this sense, will may be considered as desire will, both being held to be phases of the same thing, or rather the two poles of the same thing. The desire pole of this desire will is connected with that which we call emotion, feeling, etc., which arouses it into action. The will pole of this desire, will, is connected with that principle of mental activity which we are considering under the name of mind power, the dynamic aspect of the mind. I ask that you reread this paragraph, that you may fix this idea firmly in your mind, for upon it depends the correct understanding of much that I shall have to say in this work. In desire, we find the first step towards dynamic mentation. Desire precedes actions of will, which releases the dynamic forces of the mind power. Desire is the coiling up the steel spring of will. There is always a state of tension about desire, a state of coiled up energy caused by the feeling, emotion, or similar state which has been aroused by the sight of, or memory of, or thought of some attractive object. The feeling inspired by the attractive object coils up the spring of desire, and this coiled up energy supplies the motive powers of the will. But remember this, some desires are acted upon while others are rejected. Neither men nor things act upon every desire. There is the other pole of the desire will which must be called into action, and this leads us to a consideration of the matter of choice, determination, or decision, which is so often expressed by the term will, as I said a little further back. This choosing or determining phase of will is little more than an empty name or term, so far as it is concerned the relation between desire and will action in the cases of things and creatures lower in the scale than man. For in these cases, this choice, determination, or decisions is based entirely upon the degree of feeling or the degree of attractiveness of the objects presenting themselves to the attention. The strongest feeling, attraction, or motive interest winning the day. Fear is one of the strongest feelings influencing desire and acts usually as a neutralizer of other feelings and desires, and is most potent as a motive influencing choice or decision. In fact, one is justified in regarding fear as the negative form of desire, being really a desire not to. With the advent of reason and intellect, particularly when the self-conscious ego appears, new elements are introduced by reason of which man is enabled to deliberate and weigh motives, desires, feelings, emotions, etc., and thus the will of man is held to contain elements lacking in the general principles of will. But the aspect of will with which we are much concerned is the aspect of action, the will pole of desire will. Just where desire passes into will is impossible to decide. The chances are they blend into each other. But this we do know, that something happens at a certain stage of the mental operation whereby the attention of the thing or ego passes from the pole of desire to the pole of will, and then one of two things happens. That is, one, either the coiled up spring of desire is released by the will, and the energy of desire is transmuted into the energy of the will, which thus releases the mind power or dynamic quality of mind into action, or else, two, the will refuses to be aroused, and desire slowly uncoils the spring, and the tension is relieved gradually or at once. The will may be cultivated and developed so as to refuse to release the spring of desire into action. And in this inhibiting quality lies much of that which is called strength of will. It often requires more will not to do than to do. The aspect of action is the true dynamic quality of will, and with action all will is intimately and inseparably connected. As Professor Halleck says, will concerns itself with action. The student must keep that fact before him, no matter how complex the matter seems. Action is the inner meaning and reason of the will, and it is with this phase that we are concerned in the present work. Action is the essential aspect of mind power. The latter exists for the purpose of acting. It is the essence of activity. And so, you will see that this universal dynamic mental principle, which I have called mind power, is not the phrase of mind which manifests as intellectual reasoning process, but is that phase of mind which is aroused by the desire will and which acts. It is manifest in the universe among forms of life below the plane of reason, as well as among those on that plane, and therefore precedes reason in evolution. It also manifests along unconscious and automatic lines and precedes the self-conscious stage of man. It represents an elementary, primitive, fundamental, dynamic mental force, and may be thought of as a raw, crude, undeveloped force manifesting along the lines of instinctive action or appetency, rather than along the lines of intellect, reason, or the higher cognitive faculties. It is something far more elemental and basic than intellect. It is more akin to the elemental life forces which we personify under the name of nature. Whether or not that which we know as reason or intellect were evolved from an elemental mind stuff, or whether these higher forms of mentality are something of an entirely higher and distinct nature, or whether, as the occultists hold, intelligence is the result of the influence of a spiritual ego, something distinct from mind, upon an elementary mind stuff. These are questions belonging to other phases of the general subject of being, with which we have nothing to do in the consideration of the subject before us. I have my own opinions and beliefs on these points, and so have each of you. We may differ regarding the same, but may still be able to examine the subject before us as co-workers in spite of our lack of agreement regarding questions of philosophy, metaphysics, or religion. We are dealing with a natural force, a universal energy now and here, and should examine and study its principles just as we would were it electricity, magnetism, heat, or light we were studying. I am inviting you to a scientific study, not a metaphysical or philosophical speculation, doctrine, or theory. These latter things have their own good places, but they have no place here at this time. Okay, if you haven't already, please subscribe below to be notified when I post the next video. Thank you for your time.